Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the historical roots and the modern evolution of the US-China military dynamic. And our goal here? Total clarity. Every single concept, every strategic shift we talk about today, we're going to show you with photos and visuals so you can see exactly what has happened. And honestly, some of the scale here is pretty shocking. We're relying purely on the facts and the source material to show you exactly how we got here and what is happening right now.
But before we dive into the hard data, we kind of have to ask ourselves, how in the world did this rivalry evolve from, boots on the ground and ships in the sea, all the way to the invisible digital networks of today? I mean, it's a staggering leap, right? Going from physical geography to cyber warfare. So to really understand it, we've got to look at exactly how we got here.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start off with historical clashes and buffers, then move on to the Malacca dilemma, analyze the naval tonnage race, explore the entry of the cyberspace force, and finish up with securing key cyber terrain.
All right, Part 1, Historical Clashes and Buffers during the early Cold War.
Just look at the rapid succession of these early Cold War flashpoints. Back in 1950, as US and UN forces were nearing the Yalu River, hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops poured right across the border into Korea. Then, by 1954 and 1958, the Taiwan Strait crises erupted. The PRC was actively bombarding islands like Jinmen and Mazu, which literally brought the US 7th Fleet right up to their doorstep. These physical standoffs, they were immediate and they were incredibly violent.
And Mao's rationale here is absolutely crucial to understand. From Beijing's perspective in 1950, a US presence in Manchuria wasn't just some political headache. No, it was an existential threat. They were driven by this really deep-seated fear of encirclement. A fear so strong, it actually pushed them to go head-to-head with a technologically superior US military just to maintain a protective buffer state.
Moving on to Part 2, the Malacca dilemma and vulnerability at sea.
Well, let's pass forward a few decades. As China's economy absolutely exploded, well, so did its reliance on the oceans. In 2003, President Hu Jintao actually coined this term, the Malacca dilemma, and the realization here was pretty striking. Their entire economic modernization was relying on sea lanes that were functionally controlled by the US Navy. Because the US was the primary guarantor of security in the Indo-Pacific, Beijing looked at this and saw a massive, glaring vulnerability. To really wrap your head around exactly why this is such a huge dilemma, check out this staggering number: 70%. 70% of China's petroleum and LNG imports pass through this single, narrow strait. I mean, that is a shocking vulnerability for a global power. A blockade of the Strait of Malacca could literally starve the Chinese economy of energy almost overnight.
Which brings us to Part 3, the naval tonnage race and expanding the Blue Water Fleet.
So, to overcome that severe maritime vulnerability we just talked about, China kicked off a massive shipbuilding race. Yet, if we look at the 2025 projections, the US Navy still maintains a commanding lead in total displacement tonnage. We're talking roughly 4.5 million tons for the US compared to China's 2.5 million. And this metric is super important because in the naval world, tonnage basically equals long-term endurance, heavier weaponry, and real global power projection.
But here is where the strategy for both sides sharply diverges. The US is relying on unmatched, massive power projection, specifically those 11 nuclear supercarriers. Meanwhile, China's People's Liberation Army Navy has actually surpassed the US in the sheer number of ships. They're boasting over 370 hulls right now. So instead of giant carriers, they are prioritizing volume and rapid deployment to fiercely secure their own immediate waters.
Now let's pivot to Part 4, enter the cyberspace force and the shift to the digital domain.
Because modern fleets require a constant stream of data to even function, this arms race is basically spilled over into the invisible domain. The PLA has a roughly 60,000-strong cyberspace force, and they operate on this doctrine called system destruction warfare. The concept is honestly chillingly effective. Instead of targeting the ship itself, you target the data networks that control the planes and the ships. Think about it. If you blind the network, you don't even need to fire a single kinetic weapon to render a billion-dollar aircraft carrier completely useless.
In the execution of this, it happens systematically, in 3 kind of creeping steps. First, you have silent network reconnaissance, where they infiltrate mission planning systems and, well, they just wait. Second comes the integrated cyber and electronic attacks, stuff like jamming sensors and messing with intelligence feeds. And finally, step 3, entirely disrupting the command and control nodes. The ultimate goal here is total paralysis before the adversary even realizes the fight has started.
Which naturally leads us to Part 5, securing key cyber terrain and how the U.S. is responding.
So how exactly does the U.S. military defend against a pre-kinetic digital strike like that? Well, it requires a total paradigm shift. They're moving away from that old reactive incident defense and shifting toward proactively predicting attacks on what they call key cyber terrain. Using specialized tools like the Operational Cyber Mission Stack, analysts are mapping out every single digital dependency. I mean, we're talking down to a single local router that might be required to launch a missile or deploy a jet. By establishing dedicated cyber intelligence career paths, they're actively hunting for the enemy in the network before the alarm ever goes off.
It's crazy to think about, right? We've gone from fighting over physical rivers and straits in the 1950s to silently warring over algorithms, routers, and satellite links today. The entire geography of war has completely changed. So, as these front lines shift permanently from the sea to the server, I want to leave you with this final thought. In a battle space you can't even see, who actually holds the ultimate strategic advantage? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.